Hello, everyone. Each wealthy country has its own path to prosperity. For example, Singapore benefited from its strategic location along the world's busiest shipping route. They applied tax haven policies to attract foreign investors. Switzerland leveraged its neutral status to develop a robust financial sector, becoming the most trusted treasure trove in the world. Or Qatar simply maximized profits from selling oil and gas, then invested the money abroad. South Korea's creative approach to getting rich is also worth exploring. In the early 1960s, South Korea was ruled by the authoritarian regime of Syngman Rhee. Beyond national spirit and determination to unify the country, he had little talent for economic development. During Lee Sung-man's 12 years in power, South Korea had to rely on aid from the United States and was poorer than North Korea. Finally, frustrated by fraud in elections to maintain the presidency, citizens rose up in protest, forcing him to resign. Yoon Bo-seon, the Minister of Commerce, was elected to take his place. South Korea entered a period of political and economic instability. In 1961, a general named Park Chung-hee staged a coup, overthrowing Yoon Bo-seon. He believed that with the previous regime's poor policies, South Korea could never develop and would continue to be disregarded by the world. Upon taking power, he championed unprecedented revolutionary changes, making him the most cursed and praised dictator in South Korean history, much like Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. Park Chung-hee had autocratic tendencies, but they benefited the country's long-term development. He prioritized the Chaebols, literally the rich or large financial groups including Samsung, Hyundai and LG. They received huge government subsidies like low-interest loans, permission for domestic monopolies, and special tax breaks. Meanwhile, smaller and medium-sized businesses didn't get this preferential treatment. It seemed a bit unfair. However, South Korea's strategy was to nurture large conglomerates, propelling them overseas to compete globally and boost exports. This would spur economic growth in GDP but also increase inequality between regions and classes. To fund long-term support, the Park Chung-hee government turned half the military force, around 320,000 troops, into mercenary soldiers for the U.S. in the Vietnam War. Over 8 years they received around $5 billion, equivalent to $35 billion today, accounting for 7–8% of GDP annually. They also won contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars to support the U.S. war effort. Chong Han, Hyundai Exe Dung Duong Sao Tak Naratiwat Patani O Thai Lan Bao Nam 1965. Dung De Van Choyen Quan Va Hang Teep Te Sang Vietnam. Thanks to preferential treatment of the rich, South Korea achieved impressive economic growth, averaging over 10% annually for over 2 decades. By the mid-1980s, 8 of the 10 largest Chaebols owned massive financial institutions, contributing around 75% of GDP. In manufacturing, South Korea became one of the 4 Asian tigers along with Singapore, Taiwan and Hong Kong. Today, Chaebols still account for 84% of the country's GDP. One thing we should wonder is that initially, they lacked advanced technology in areas like automobiles, electronics, semiconductors and shipbuilding compared to the West. So how did they manage to produce competitive goods? No one is born an expert. South Korea went through 3 stages to acquire advanced technology. First, they spent billions of dollars annually to import production lines from the US, Japan and Europe. Then they encouraged industrialization of everything imported, in other words, copying whatever possible. The government supported such businesses through low-interest loans or tax breaks. However, before doing this, South Korea focused on training many skilled engineers and workers. Otherwise, even copying would not be feasible. At the same time, they prevented foreign companies with imported products from opening facilities in South Korea, protecting domestic investors. Second, they attracted foreign experts with capabilities in fields needing development to train and advise local engineers. From there, South Korea could produce imitation goods and export them to potential markets. At this stage, their products were mainly knockoffs and lower quality than the originals. However, thanks to cheap labor and generous government tax incentives, they could lower costs to supply markets demanding cheap goods. This was later applied very successfully by China. In the third ironic stage, South Korean products gradually improved in quality to match the originals. Therefore, foreign companies feared they would become formidable low-cost competitors and stop transferring production technology. In this crisis, South Korea established a national research fund to hire top experts to train and upgrade scientific and technological innovation. However, catching up with Western technology took up to 10 years to complete, after which they attained autonomy and independence, able to create extremely competitive products by the 1990s. To this day, South Korea continues that tradition, becoming one of the world's fastest countries in manufacturing technology innovation, surpassing even the US and Japan. Regarding their emergence on the world stage, the US contributed significantly, not just through aid but easy access to the strongest consumer market globally. Understandably, South Korea was indulged more than other US allies, having sacrificed many soldiers' lives in the Vietnam War in exchange. Beyond the above factors, by copying aspects of Japan's education system and quickly training many engineers to serve high-tech manufacturing in the early stages, South Korean schools crammed knowledge into students with 12-hour days. Finally, they became slightly smarter and could produce quality goods for export like cars, computers, phones, semiconductors and chemicals. During the Asian Tiger period, they also had a golden population structure with a young, energetic, zealous workforce with skills that rapidly catalyzed the industrial boom. All of that created the Korean Tiger. Nothing was particularly extraordinary. It all started with an idea by President Park Chung-hee and the efforts of the entire populace.